So today I have the great pleasure to introduce to you Agnieszka Pasieka, who is a visiting assistant professor and postdoctoral fellow at the Polish Academy of Science in Warsaw, where she's conducting research now on the intersection between religion, ethnicity, and class. And as part of that project, she conducted a 6-month historical ethnographic research on the Polonia of Massachusetts, actually, descendants of Polish immigrants to the East Coast, farmers after several generations who still consider themselves Polish. And she was there last weekend for Thanksgiving, and she received, I was told, 100 pounds of potato as a gift with several varietals and vodka, and a bottle of vodka too. So they take their Polishness very seriously east. Dr. Pasieka holds an MA in sociology from Jagiellonian University, and then she went on to Germany to conduct her research, well, not the research, but to do her PhD in social anthropology with Chris Hahn. And she's publishing now the book that came out of that doctoral research. It's called Hierarchy and Pluralism, Living Religious Difference in Catholic Poland. It's coming out very soon with Palgrave. I think there's a flyer of the book also, so I strongly encourage you to take a flyer and purchase it on Amazon so her ratings can jump. And it studies the situation of religious and ethnic minorities in the context of church-state relations in Poland. She was a fellow at the Max Planck Institute for Social Anthropology in Halle. She was also a fellow at the Institute for Human Sciences in Vienna. And last year, while she was doing that research with Polish farmers in Massachusetts, she was a visiting fellow at Yale University. So we're very happy to have her present the research on her forthcoming book and to host her in Ann Arbor. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Pasieka.
Okay, is it fine? Yeah. So,
I forgot to switch this, sorry. Oops. Okay. I need your help, apparently. I pushed the wrong button. Sorry.
it's no problem. I wouldn't know what to do either.
I needed to switch screens.
So, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. I would like to thank to Geneviève for inviting me, and I would like to thank to Donna for such a wonderful organization of my stay and such a warm welcome. I hope she heard. Yeah, she heard me. Okay. And it's really an honor for me to be here and a big pleasure to present my research to such a wonderful audience. I'm really happy to see some familiar faces and many new people and students. And I really look forward to your comments and feedback. Unfortunately, the book is done, so I won't be able to introduce many changes. But I will still write on articles and so on. So I really look forward to your feedback. So in my today's talk, I'm going to speak about religious pluralism in Poland, and more specifically about the challenges facing religious pluralism in a religiously homogeneous society, as well as on what the investigation of pluralism in such a context tells us about pluralism more broadly. My case study is a multi-religious and multi-ethnic rural district in which I carried out over a year of ethnographic fieldwork between 2008 and 2009. And as the title of my talk suggests, I'll be talking about pluralism from below, scrutinizing the ways in which local people engage with, debate, produce pluralism. But as I will demonstrate, talking about such a grassroots pluralism means the necessity of engaging also with its counterpart, that is, with the diverse top-down conceptualizations of diversity, which in my talk translate mostly into the investigation of recently introduced policies endorsing multiculturalism. And I suggest that this is precisely the tension between this pluralism from below and pluralism from above to be decisive in shaping the local realm. I will start my talk with presenting you with a short description of the area that I studied, the historical context, the main protagonist of my talk, and I will then follow with an ethnographic story of a very concrete place that I studied, and which, in my view, encapsulates the tensions and paradoxes of religious pluralism in Poland and beyond. So, let me show you the map of my field site location. The district that I studied is composed of 20 different villages. I anonymize it as Rostaje. It's not a true name, although unfortunately quite easily recognizable in the Polish context. But I do it because I want to preserve the anonymity. I care about my informants and try to preserve their anonymity. It is one of the largest districts in the country, situated close to the Slovakian border, as you can see. It is one of the largest, but at the same time, one of the least populous. 6,500 inhabitants live in 20 dispersed villages. It is deprived of big urban centers and industry, and for that reason, it's also known for tranquility and isolation. Local inhabitants perceive this fact as negatively. They complain about the district marginality and peripheral status, but a growing number of tourists perceive it actually as an asset. And consequently, the number of people making a living from agriculture is in decline, while tourism has been gradually becoming the main source of employment for the local people, and it is actively promoted by the local government. I will now show you just a few. This is, I could say, like a classical scene from my fieldwork, two people walking back from their fields. This is very much how the local landscape looks. And since I'm speaking about religion, I wanted to show you two pictures. This is one of the Eastern Christian churches, a wooden church, very typical for the area. And on the second picture, you can see a cross. This kind of crosses were put in the past, were placed in the past next to people's houses in order to thank for the birth of the child or as a prayer for somebody's health, in different for the very different reasons. And you can see many of them still nowadays in the area. So, despite this different way in which the marginality and the peripheral status of the area is approached, there is one thing that locals, tourists, and the authorities agree about. And this is the fact that what makes this area special is the presence of 7 religious communities and 2 ethnic groups. In other words, an ethno-religious mosaic that constitutes a rarity in an overall homogeneous Polish context in which 95% of people define themselves as ethnic Poles and as Roman Catholics. And this district's exceptional diversity, which is more and more often referred to as multiculturalism, has recently become a means of attracting tourists, of getting European funds, as well as a beloved subject of journalists, mostly from regional press, who define Rostaje as, quote, pearl of multiculturalism and, again, quote, perhaps the most ecumenical region in all of Poland. Before I go into details about the specific policies of multiculturalism and local responses to them, we need to do a short trip into the history, which will help us to understand the present-day religious landscape. So, historically, the area was inhabited by the Rusin or Ruthenian population, which practiced Eastern Christianity. As a consequence of the Union of Brest in 1596, Rusin people were made abandon Orthodoxy for the newly established Uniate Church, later renamed as the Greek Catholic Church, that is the church which maintained the Orthodox liturgy while accepting the Catholic dogma and the authority of the Pope. However, towards the end of the 19th century, a process of reconversion began, reaching the peak in the period between 2 world wars. Tired of the clashes between the Orthodox and Greek Catholic fractions, numerous local people began to follow Jehovah's Witnesses and Pentecostalism. Both these creeds were actually brought to the region from North America by returning immigrants. There were a lot of temporary migrations in the period from the end of the 19th century onwards. Religious conflicts were also paralleled by ethnic clashes between the people who promoted the idea of Rusins as a separate nation and who popularized the ethnonym Łemko, and between Ukrainian national activists who fostered pro-Ukrainian sentiments in the villages. A side comment here, throughout my talk, I will be referring to the local people as Wemkos, which is not to ignore very complex matrix of national ethnic identities in the area, for a simple reason. This is the way people I interviewed define themselves. And apart from Wemko, or like Wemko Ukrainians, at the time, there were also in most, like especially in bigger village, there were a few Jewish and Polish families. So this was more or less the landscape before the World War II. The Second World War and its aftermath marked the end of the Wemko and Jewish presence in the area. Rostaye Jews perished in the concentration camps, and Wemkos were resettled. 70% of people were transferred to the Soviet Union during the war, and the remaining population was forcibly moved by Polish communist regime to the so-called recovered lands, that is, the territories assigned to Poland after the war. Polish settlers were brought to Rostaye, and with them, Roman Catholicism. Poles adapted some of Eastern Christian churches for their own use and took over abandoned property and fields. In the mid-50s, after the regime became more lenient, some Wemkos managed to return to their homesteads, buying back their old houses or building new ones. People, Wemkos and Poles alike, recalled that after a few years of conflicts over the property and over religious shrines, the inhabitants recognized that they had a common enemy, that is the economic shortage and underdevelopment of the agriculture which characterized the communist period, which basically forced them to cooperate, establish cooperation with new neighbors. And therefore, they recalled the times of People's Poland as a time of solidarity and mutual help across religious and ethnic boundaries. Interactions between Roman Catholics and Eastern Christians led to intermarriages and further conversions. And also, despite the communist policies towards religious minorities, Pentecostals and Jehovah's Witnesses continued to sermonize and proselytize, and they were gaining new members. And due to the missionary activities of Seventh-day Adventists, yet another religious community began meeting for praise in Rostaye and settled there for good in the 70s. The seventh religious community are Buddhists, who settled in Rostaye in the 90s and opened a meditation center. However, local people are likely to name many more religious denominations that supposedly live in the area. During my stay, I heard about Hindu, Muslims, Baptists, atheists, agnostics, and once or twice even about a mysterious religious community called anthropologists. But it is not the perfect knowledge of religious others to be the most important here. Although some of religious communities are not very numerous, for example, the Buddhist and the Adventist communities, you can see both the two pictures below, the Buddhist and the Adventist, count only several people. Pentecostals and Jehovah's Witnesses have several dozens of adherents, Orthodox and Greek Catholics several hundreds. And although Roman Catholics constitute the majority, around 75% of the population, despite these numerical differences, the diversity is not only experienced on the everyday basis, but both acknowledged and emphasized by all the inhabitants. Moreover, the process of conversions continues today, resulting from very, very different factors: mixed marriages, anger with the priest, migrations and transnational relations with overseas communities, and last but not least, the assimilation policies of the Roman Catholic majority. And finally, what is very important is the fact that there is no one-to-one relation between religious and ethnic identity. One can meet Polish and Wemko Adventists, Polish and Wemko Pentecostals, Polish and Wemko Greek Catholics. But although it is impossible to attribute one religious denomination to one ethnic group, there is a very strong expectation that a proper, a good, and normal Pole is a Roman Catholic, and that the true Wemko is the one who goes to the Cerkiew, that is, belongs to Orthodoxy or Greek Catholicism. As I will show, the seemingly diversity-friendly policies of multiculturalism tend to reinforce precisely these expectations. In order to demonstrate it, I would like to invite you now for a walk through a village which constitutes Rostaye Tourist Center and attracts visitors due to the presence of several sanatoria, the local mineral water industry, and the main highlight, the newly renovated park. Here is the map of the park. the park was renovated thanks to the European Union funds. In the middle, you can actually, do I have something to show? So in the middle, you can see, can you hear me now?
Yes.
In the middle, you can see a pump room. People come there to drink mineral water. There are also many other different places where there are like little springs of mineral water. There are some playgrounds. There is a modern swimming pool that you can see in the right corner. And there is a bandstand you can see on the top where there are concerts, music, performances, and so on. And the park, this very park, was actually constructed in the mid-19th century by Polish aristocrats who discovered the economic potential of mineral waters and decided on building a spa, which turned into a very successful and widely recognized investment. After several prosperous decades, the spa town went into decline, and it was partly destroyed during the wars. In People's Poland, it was nationalized and equipped with sanatoria and a specialist hospital. However, it was only after 1981 that the authorities made an attempt to bring back the past splendor of the spa town, paying special attention to the park area, which was supposed to become a prominent symbol of the entire, increasingly tourist-oriented district. In recent years, the local government has made their sizable investment, which you can see on the map. It renovated the paths, rebuilt a wooden pump room, which burned in the 60s, and constructed a modern swimming pool and a playground. The park contains also a few historic villas, which today function as pensions and restaurants. You can see here a few pictures. This is more or less how the park looks like. This is one of the restaurants where you can eat regional food, and this has the renovated pump room. According to my oldest informants, a part of the park and some of the villas used to belong to Jews who ran a store and an inn there. Although all Rostaje Jews perished in the concentration camps during the war, and no Jews live there today, it is very important to start the exploration of the park and of pluralism more broadly precisely with the Jewish question. In analyzing my research material, I referred to Jews as an invisible minority, the image of which is activated in certain contexts. The memories of Jews are recalled by both Łemkos, who lived in Rostaje before the war and managed to come back in the 50s, and by Poles, who settled in Rostaje after the war and brought their memories of Jews from different parts of Poland. The first group, Łemkos, approaches Jews in two different ways. On the one hand, they condemn those people who made money out of Jewish tragedy, for instance, by using their houses after Jews were taken to the concentration camps. And at the same time, they speak about Polish state preferential treatment of Jews, who nowadays get back their properties, while Łemkos wait in vain for material compensation for their forced resettlement and nationalized forests. In contrast, Polish people comment on Jews regard some stereotypical characteristics such as attachment to money and flair for trade. What I noticed frequently was the use of certain wordings and grammatical constructions which were employed in order to describe Jews. And these are the sentences that I heard very often while walking through the park. So people would say, for example, for a Jew, honest for a Jew, though, honest though a Jew, even if he is a Jew, he's a nice man, or despite being a Jew, he's a good person. So I got used to such comments, talking to inhabitants, as well as eavesdropping on tourist conversation while sitting in the park. And I quickly realized that the way people talk about Jews characterize their opinions about different religious others too, among them about religious communities that inhabit Rostaje today. A person who excelled in this process was the woman I called Miss Tekla, the chief guide of the commune, who often visits the park with the groups of the sanatoria visitors. The task of Miss Tekla is to present tourists with the multicultural heritage of the region. And so she shows tourists Eastern Christian wooden churches, old Łemko buildings, and unique cemeteries from the First World War. Miss Tekla is a very cheerful, very talkative person, and her tourist routes are accompanied by vivid stories and therefore also widely attended. Having seen Miss Tekla with tourist group in the park and having heard about her from numerous inhabitants who actually encouraged me to talk to her, I decided to take part in one of her lectures. Her story of local multiculturalism was the story of Roman Catholic bishops and Polish aristocrats who owned the territory and led to its development. They were tolerant enough to let work Russian population who inhabited the area. She said few words about the Ruthenian colonization of the region in the Middle Ages and kept silent on the post-war violent resettlements. But she paid a lot of attention to the development of the sanatoria and spa. Since I did not participate in her lectures regularly, I cannot really assert that she never paid more attention to the question of the Wemco and other minority situation. However, the way she presented Poles and Wemcos during the lectures I actually attended exemplify a scheme in which majority-minority relations are often framed in the Polish historical discourse. According to these schemes, Poles, nobles, clergy, intelligentsia constitute an enlightened, tolerant, and devoted majority, while minority communities are first and foremost inscribed to the sphere of local folklore, and crucially, they are representatives of a different culture. The way Ms. Tekla describes the pluralistic character of the area is very telling too. When I told her about my research project and asked about interreligious relations in the area, she answered that I didn't have much to study. She said, relations are simply exemplary. And she explained, we permit the Orthodox to work with us. Describing the places that she intended to show to a tourist group, she observed that the shrine should be respected even though it is Orthodox. She was actually explaining to me why she couldn't bring her dog there. She said, oh, my tourists love when I bring dog with me, but this is an Orthodox church, we shouldn't enter with the dog, even though it is Orthodox. And when I inquired whom I should talk to in order to learn something more about the region, she provided me with a long list, which started with a descendant of Polish aristocrats who had recently moved to the village, and which ended with representatives of non-Catholic religious communities. According to Ms. Tekla, Buddhists and Adventists were worth talking to, despite not being Catholics. But what is very interesting is the fact that one of the places that Ms. Tekla always visits with her group is the pump room, situated in the center of the park. I show you once again. This is the pre-war pump room. You can see that it was really nicely redone, reconstructed. The pump room, which is actually run by a Pentecostal man, and Ms. Tekla is is on good terms with him. Tadek, the Pentecostal in question, is a very talkative, friendly man. He's also, similar to Ms. Tekla, he's also very eager to speak to anyone who drops by for a glass of water. He recounts to the guests the story of the region and entertains them with funny stories. And the way he talks, the fact that he has a rich repertoire of body language makes him an interesting character. People like to return to him and talk more and more. It was the same case with me. When I visited Tadek for the first time and told him about my research on religious pluralism, he poured me a glass of smelly water and immediately began to provide me with all sorts of information. He started by telling me that he was a Pentecostal and that I should get to know his congregation, come for a service and meet with his co-religionist. And he emphasized that coming to one of the services was actually very important for me, since it was very different from, quote, the Catholic Mass I was used to. And I interrupted him and asked why he assumed that I'm a member of the Roman Catholic Church. But he completely ignored the question and just went on with the story of Pentecostal community. And he continued, and he repeated then once again a similar assumption about me being Roman Catholic. So I interrupted him once again, and why do you assume I am a Roman Catholic? He gave me a surprised look and said, well, I certainly hope you are not an atheist, and went on again with his story. And concluding, he said, well, the faith is one, there are just different, the faith is one, there are different confessions, suggesting that that I didn't have to worry, we had lots of in common. Roman Catholics are not that far from Pentecostals. for what matters is the belief in God. So I need to leave the park for a moment, make a small digression, and say that contrary to Tadek, who was so surprised by my question, by my naive question, I was not at all surprised by his claim about my religious belonging. The assumption about my Roman Catholic background shaped most of my encounters with local people, and our exchanges on the subject resembles the one I had with Tadek. People, and among them non-Catholic Poles or Roman Catholic Łemkos, would often say that it is normal to be Roman Catholic in Poland, or they would go as far as to ask, what else than a Catholic can you be in Poland? In the course of my fieldwork, only 2 people questioned, it was over 14 months. In the course of my fieldwork, only 2 people questioned my belonging to the Roman Catholic Church. One was a devout Roman Catholic woman who was astonished at my ignorance of certain Catholic festivities. And the other person was Tadek's friend and co-religionist Wojtek, who said that contrary to other Roman Catholics he knows, I do not defend the Catholic Church. And what is most surprising and important about it is the fact that that is the people who are themselves to the best example of the fact that one can be something else than a Catholic in Poland, who end up questioning this possibility. In other words, this powerfulness of the Polish Catholic norm, this Polish Catholic bond, shapes people's convictions, leads to the process of self-exclusion. Because confronted with this norm, people exclude themselves from the Polish national community by highlighting what is considered normal and proper in Poland. Back to the pump room. I was not the only person with whom Tadek shared his knowledge and experiences of the Pentecostal community. He claims that he never aims to convert anyone, that he just speaks about local diversity. However, his way of promotion of local diversity is not generally accepted. One day, 2 elderly visitors dropped by for a glass of mineral water and stopped to talk to Tadek. They stayed a while, and Tadek was very proud that they got so interested in his stories. He told them, among others, that part of the village is inhabited by numerous Pentecostal and Adventist families. Indeed, not only do many Pentecostal live there today, but this part of the village was the place of first Pentecostal gatherings during the World War II, and prayers before, and it is today considered to be a cradle of Pentecostalism in the Łemko area. The conversation was, however, overheard by a district representative, and as she herself told me, referring to the situation nervously afterwards, she quickly ran to the, quote, group of frightened ladies and reassured them that Pentecostals were not that numerous. And she told me, those poor ladies were so scared. She was deeply concerned with Tadek's stories, and she said that they might have a, again, quote, damaging effect of the image of the multicultural district. Tadek's version differed because he also referred to me this story because he was very upset about it, and he said he described the frightened ladies as intrigued and claimed that they were very interested in his story, that because they had known nothing, about the presence of different religious communities in the area. This reaction of the district employee is actually very revealing about the way diversity is perceived by many representatives of the majority. The assumption of certain attitudes towards religious others, such as the fact that information about numerous religious communities may scare off people. Briefly speaking, the diversity is fine, it's good to talk about it, but there are limits. The limits are set and clear. And so it is a certain representation of minorities. They are no more than an addition to the local landscape. They cannot be too prominent. And such a perception of minorities was reflected in many other comments of the local authorities with whom I spoke to. For example, when I inquired about the religion, because in Poland it is possible to have religious classes at school. They are a part of school curriculum. But when minority religious communities want the religious class, the authorities will say that they demand the class. When they speak about Roman Catholics wanting a religious teaching, they are entitled today. So this demand versus entitlement, right? This is the way it is perceived. In order to better understand this process, we need to go once back to the pump room and the park. TADEC's more or less successful promotion of diversity is not the only way in which diversity is being talked about and represented in the area. In order to enrich the calendar of cultural events and preserve regional heritage, the district authorities and diverse local activists have undertaken different initiatives which display the richness of local in the main WEMCO traditions. These are, for example, the concerts of Orthodox and Greek Catholic music. One of them you can see here. WEMCO choirs performances, folk dances, these sorts of things. The wooden pump rooms, which bear resemblances with local wooden churches, provides a very good setting for such performances. Encouraged by the success of WEMCO concerts, the local Pentecostal community asked the local government for permission to organize a performance of Pentecostal songs on the bandstand situated in the vicinity of the pump room. The local government objected and defended the decision by stating that Poland is a secular country and the public sphere must be free of religious content. When one of Pentecostals noted that the Roman Catholic Corpus Christi procession takes place in the public sphere, lasts a few hours, the procession blocks people entrances to homes and garages and nothing, nobody can say nothing. One of the representatives of the authorities replied that Corpus Christi is a part of tradition and that it is something normal. And eventually, after long negotiations, the authorities granted the congregation the permission to organize a concert, but they forbade the organizers to speak during the performance. They were only allowed to sing. They were afraid that they would encourage people to convert. And they strictly controlled the entire course of the preparations, interfering even in the appearance of the posters advertising the event. For example, they did not allow including any quotes from the Bible on the posters. To the best of my knowledge, the Pentecostals have not tried to organize any other public performances since then. What is organized every summer nearby the bandstand, however, is the folkloric fair, which gathers artisans, circles of rural housewives, food producers, and farmers who offer tourists and inhabitants local traditions and products. That is, objects and groceries which have been indeed present in the region for decades, as well as those which have been recently reinvented and rebranded for the purpose of present-day regional promotion. Here is a picture from one of such fairs, and here you can read that this is the magic land of WEMCOs that is being represented. So the difficulties faced by the Pentecostal community are perhaps the most revealing evidence of the double-edged character of multicultural policies. They account for a situation in which, in theory, everyone has equal rights, but in practice, some individuals or groups are discriminated against, and in which the means of discrimination is the reference to equal rights, in this case, the neutrality of the public sphere. The reason why discrimination takes place is the fact that the Roman Catholic Creed is more equal among equals. Their presence in the public sphere does not count as a presence because it is a part of tradition. As such, it goes without saying, and it is perceived as something normal. In other words, while the presence of minority communities is visible and disturbing for many, the presence of Roman Catholic rituals or symbols is supposed to be invisible, as it is a natural part of the local landscape. But these examples also invite us to ask why not only Roman Catholic Poles are more equal than others, but also why some minorities seem to be more equal than others, why Orthodox and Greek Catholics are allowed to organize a concert. On the one hand, this can be explained as a legitimate attempt to acknowledge the cultural heritage of the WEMCO population, which has inhabited the region for centuries. But it is also worth noting that WEMCO ethnic religious traditions are simply more easily presented as a folkloric representation, which are celebrated only occasionally and generally presented as remnants of the past. As such, WEMCO ethno-religious culture constitutes a much more suitable candidate for the icon of local diversity. It is if the only diversity that is acceptable is that which sells well and attracts visitors, then minority groups fare better, whose practices can be presented more easily as a culture, as a local culture. So, given all these paradoxical findings, what can we say about pluralism in Rostaje? Can we actually speak about pluralism there? Some of these anecdotes may suggest that speaking about pluralism in such a context is a parody, and that discourse on pluralism is meaningless in a country in which the bond between national and religious identities is imbued with so much normative meaning that this tie appears natural even to non-Catholics. Nonetheless, numerous local practices account for people who wish to engage with pluralism, to create a system of living together built on the recognition of the commonalities and differences alike. These practices occur on different levels, and I would like to show you some examples here. For example, many local activists try to bring back into life the Wemco villages which were abandoned during the resettlements and in which nobody lives today. And here you can see the door, and on the door there is a map. People, local historians, students, and with the cooperation in the cooperation of local government, they were interviewing Wemco inhabitants and managed to recreate the map of the pre-war village. And this kind of doors, which symbolize a symbol of the houses that used to stand there, are supposed to remind people about the history of the area, the Wemco presence. You have activities of young people. Here you can see the group of carol singers who go around the village on 7th of January, the day of Orthodox and Greek Catholic Christmas. They also revive different traditions. So you see here like the stereotypical folk figures. In the middle you have gypsy fortune tellers who go to people's houses. They tell them, they try to foresee the future. And on the right, you see the boy with the glasses and dark hat. This is a stereotypical image of a Jewish man who goes to people's houses and tries to do business with them. And in fact, he encourages them to make a donation for the maintainers of Greek Catholic and Orthodox shrines. So this is the way, paradoxical use, but this is the way in which local people, of course, like for some people, this folk representation of religious others might be disturbing. This is the way in which young people, these are mostly Wemco people, but also their Polish friends who also want to engage with that. They say we have to support, we have to keep traditions alive, we have to remind about this diverse heritage of our village. We need to help to maintain Orthodox and Greek Catholic shrines, which do not receive which situation is not as easy as of the Roman Catholic Church in Poland. They don't receive that such a support. And you have, finally, a sphere of neighborly interactions, everyday encounters of people of different religious belonging to different religious communities who just meet on everyday basis. The difference is being familiarized. They don't necessarily see themselves as Pentecostals, as Greek Catholics. They see themselves as neighbors, as friends, as workmates. One more picture I wanted to show you. This is the entire village community going to the cemetery to attend a funeral. It doesn't matter what was the religious background of the person. People attend the funeral respecting somebody as a good neighbor, as an inhabitant of the same village. There are many things that people have in common, and they recognize this communalities. There is respect for other people's festivities. For example, people refrain from work when for example, Roman Catholics refrain from work when Orthodox and Greek Catholics celebrate Christmas or Easter, and vice versa. So I don't want to idealize none of this neighborly encounters, this everyday processes of negotiating difference. None of these spheres is free of tensions and conflicts. Throughout my fieldwork, I had an opportunity to observe how good neighbors transformed into inimical religious others, and I was also able to attend to the failure of various pluralizing community building projects. But to my mind, such failures do not cancel out the significance of their attempts, but rather point to the paradoxical nature of pluralism. And I define this phenomenon, this paradoxical nature of pluralism, as hierarchical pluralism. I understand it as a changeable configuration of social relations that both allows and acknowledges diversity, while simultaneously making it clear which ethnic or religious group is dominant and norm-defining. Understood in this way, hierarchical order does not eliminate, it does not oppose the difference, but accepts it and encompasses it. At the same time, this very act of accepting or encompassing displays who has the power who accepts, who is the dominant, and who seeks to be accepted. And what puts into motion the dynamic of interreligious relations in the village is precisely the constant oscillation between this more egalitarian and non-egalitarian ideas and trends, between, we could say, the pole of pluralism and the pole of hierarchy. The foundation of hierarchical pluralism is, in my view, the conviction, this widespread conviction that a true Pole is a Catholic, and that Catholicism is the normal religion in Poland. Promoted and reinforced by different states as well as churches' policies, this conviction is deeply internalized and referred to by minority communities, as you could see. Contemporary historiography, educational policies, cultural productions make clear what is to be considered Polish identity, Polish heritage, Polish tradition. Consequently, certain aspects of Catholic religion, religious identity, tradition, symbols, shrines, are perceived as something normal and natural, as an indisputable and taken for granted element of the social cultural landscape. Taking into account a broader Polish context, it is important to observe that the normativity of the Polish Catholic bond does not affect only religious other, only such marginal areas as Rozstaje, but also numerous individuals and groups, among them Catholics, who disagree with this model. And moving even further beyond and looking at the religious landscape in other Western countries, it is possible to observe the continuous importance of Catholicism and Christianity more generally as a point of reference, as a norm to refer to, even by the countries and by people who promote secularist ideology and emphasize church-state division. Examples from France, Germany, Italy, Quebec, studied by Geneviève, illustrate the power and the normativity of the discourse which imposes religion and as tradition and culture, and which demonstrate, as Geneviève Zubrzycki says, society's problematic relation with their own tradition and their own religious past. But what I would like to highlight here, once again, is the way in which the discourse of multiculturalism contribute to the reproduction of inequalities. For paradoxically, the narrative that promotes the view of multicultural Poland often has a similar effect to that of highlighting an intrinsic and natural connection between Catholicism and Polishness. It is similar because the discourse on multicultural Poland highlights the separateness of ethnic and religious others from the core of Polish Catholic culture. Their contributions to Polish sociocultural history are framed as non-Polish. As, to use the formulation of Brian Porter, there can be diversity in the nation, but not of the nation. Such a discourse allows the presence of others, but underlines that this presence is owed to the exceptional Polish tolerance and ensures that others do not infringe of the idea of the Polish Catholic bond as special and natural. The effects of this discourse are discernible in numerous scholarly publications which willingly and unreflectively adopt the concept of multiculturalism, as well as in regional policies and marketing strategies. Recalling the past diversity of their villages and localities, many local governments would gladly transform their localities into open-air museums of multiculturalism, as this is what is just a trend, and this is what generates funds and interest. Although a growing interest in local history is no doubt positive, it often leads to further othering of minorities, presenting them as cultural and folkloric attractions that have contributed no more than folk songs and crafts to the country's history. I have visited many other small villages and towns after I finished that field work, sometimes for purpose of research, sometimes as a tourist, and I had I don't want to exaggerate, but I had a feeling that I meet Mrs. Tekla everywhere. The narrative always presenting the local history always through Polish lenses. So I think this is something that has to be highlighted. This paradoxical with this idea that how is it possible that the promotion of diversity actually turns out to be damaging for minorities. We could stop here. We could state that the limits of pluralism in the multi-religious Rostaje are set by the dominant group, that the Polish Catholic dominance is a result of symbolic violence, that top-down ideas of diversity tend to be detrimental for local pluralism. However, I would like to say at the end, add something more to this picture of pluralism from below, because the picture that we got so far is not the full one. And we need to here to introduce voices of a few others religious minorities. Unsurprisingly, religious communities who inhabit Rostaje see their position as precarious. In criticizing the dominant group, Roman Catholics, minorities express certainty that they would do better as a majority. For example, Orthodox told me that they would show the importance of the Christian message instead of putting pressure on the politicians as Catholics do. Adventists say that they would pray for the politicians instead of telling them what to do, as Catholics do in Poland. And Buddhists told me that they would simply promote the belief in human reason. However, a closer investigation of minority discourses reveals that hierarchical pluralism is not exclusively a product of relation between the Roman Catholic majority and minority communities, but rather we need to see it as a set of different interreligious alliances, conflict, divisions. Listening carefully to local discourse on religion, it becomes quite clear that the communities who demand recognition for themselves often do not really want to grant it to others. And for example, a young Greek Catholic woman told me once, quote, what I mean is that there should be no dominance of one group, she referred to Roman Catholics. We should really strive for a real ecumenism. And she added, although, of course, it would be good to say to Jehovah's Witnesses that they are senseless. Similarly, in a similar way, a Buddhist man living in the area told me once, there are neither good nor bad religions. Every religion is good for a specific type of people. But I'm glad there are no Muslims here. I'm really glad of that. You know what's their approach to women, to the people who have different opinions. Generally, every religion but Muslims has something positive, valuable. But Islams seem terrifying to me. And an Orthodox man expressed once his opinion about Greek Catholics. Greek Catholicism, it is neither fish nor fowl. It is a freak of spiritual nature, an institution that left one church but did not really enter the other. It cannot be a partner in dialogue. And he concluded, when it comes to Catholics, only the dialogue with the Roman Catholic Church is rational and normal. So we can see that this act of setting limits and establishing what kind of interreligious relations are to be considered normal and sensible is not the exclusive domain of the majority. Often, minority discourses aims not only to legitimize pluralism, but also to delegitimize other religious actors. Their discourses are built around the categories provided by the dominant one. Whether they question Roman Catholic domination or whether they express their views on other religious communities, minorities do reach for the vocabulary of the dominant discourse, inadvertently reproducing it. So, to conclude, there is no doubt that certain characteristics of Roman Catholicism and peculiar socio-historical developments make up a mixture which facilitates the Catholic Church dominance, its position in Poland, and which keeps reinforcing Polish Catholic bond. But it is also worth asking whether it is a specific religion and specific conditions which are decisive in forming certain normative expectations, or if there is something specific in the very condition of being a dominant religion. More research is needed to answer this question. I would need to go to a country where maybe Protestants are dominant or Orthodox. But I want to conclude with the observation that the experience of pluralism as conveyed by the inhabitants of Rostaje seems to suggest that hierarchy is permanently inscribed into pluralism. So, in other words, this seemingly oxymoronic notion of hierarchical pluralism might be in fact, perceived as a tautology. Thank you very much. Should maybe I just collect some questions? Yeah. Okay, please. Thank you.
Yeah, the beginning of your talk spoke of Jews being invisible presence. The beginning of your talk spoke of the Jews being an invisible presence in this region, the minority community. Like, what's the, I guess, the narrative, to use your terminology, in that region, considering what happened to the Jews? And does this differ by, affiliation with one religion or another, or affiliation with an ethnic group?
Should I collect a few questions, or I can just? Okay. So thank you very much. So I refer to Jews as an invisible minority simply because you don't see Jewish traces there. If you talk to the inhabitants, as I did, you actually learn that, a villa, that house used to belong, or there was a synagogue there, or a house of prayer, rather. But they are recalled in different contexts. People never speak about the period before the world without mentioning Jews. They never speak about the period between the two world wars without mentioning the Jewish presence in the area. And without being asked to do so, I never asked them, were there Jews here? People just talked about Jewish neighbors without being asked to do so. So they are not there, but they are in people's memories. They are there in the local landscape. That's the way they find. Yeah.
Like, what happened to the Jews,
People, according to the people I talked to, so only Wemco people lived there during the war. They claimed that all the Jewish population was taken to the concentration camp right after the beginning of the war. I didn't find any documents on that in local archives. I didn't have a chance to consult it, but there were very few Jewish family, 3 or 4 Jewish families in every village, and in each and every village, people said that Jewish people were just taken to the concentration camp. I don't know if you are wondering whether some people were trying to hide Jews. Is that what you were also referring to?
what they thought happened. Whether they blinked the fact that this happened, or they didn't.
No. So they would always say, okay, so our Jewish neighbors, that's important to say, our Jewish neighbors were taken to the concentration camp, and they are very, very critical of the people who then took over their houses, who made, who became rich thanks to the fact that they got in possession Jewish belongings. Actually, I had one. That was a very, very weird interview I had with a Wemco couple. I was invited to join them for a dinner, and there was an elderly couple, man and a woman, and the man was telling me the history of the area while his wife was preparing food, and he kept bringing different things on the table, and she just somehow she she destroyed the tablecloth while putting something on the table. And she said, "Oh, the quality of tablecloths today, they are not as good as the Jewish tablecloths that we took out of the Jewish house." And I was like speechless. But this story was, and like I thought, oh, it's an eye-opening story. But this was the only time that happened. It's like another anecdote rather than a common narrative. But also because it was, as I'm saying, 2 free Jewish families in the area. There is one interesting story, or yet another interesting story. I will conclude with that. In one village, there was a very handsome Jewish boy, and many Greek Catholic girls were in love with him. And his father, who was a rich tailor, I think, a rich tailor in the village, he was very upset that his son was like, that so many Greek Catholic Christian girls were interested in his son, and he was afraid, and he sent his son to Palestine. And he's the only one who survived the war because his family then perished in the concentration camp. And he actually came to visit the village, I think, in the 80s as an old man. And this story was referred to me by one of the ladies who was actually in love with the boy at the time. And she told me, "Can you believe it? Nobody told me that he came to the village. I wanted to see him." She was. So that's about it. About this.
Maybe should I?
Yeah, please. Thank you.
Then Brian, then you, then you. So
I really
briefly then.
I really enjoyed this lecture very much, especially because I'm interested in this kind of region of Eastern Europe, the Carpathian Ruthenian area. And I have 2 questions. The first is really quick. How did these people identify themselves, these Orthodox Greek Catholic nationalities, as Rusins, as Ruthenians, as Lemkos? Because that's one issue. And the second is, do like a comparative study of this region with other kind of multicultural regions within Poland, because even though Poland has a reputation for being homogeneous, you have like other regions like the Kashub region, the Silesian region, so it'd be interesting, how does this compare? Do a comparative study.
Thank you very much. Are we collecting a few questions, or? Maybe you.
Well, actually, yeah, I wanted to follow up on that and also ask a question about region. I don't challenge for a moment that the general claims you're making would be true anywhere in Poland. But you are looking at a very distinctive region, right? One where the Catholic Church is probably stronger than anywhere else in the country, right? Institutionally, in the way it's embedded in local culture. And I actually wonder not so much about other rural regions of the country, but about urban areas, which is where most Poles live nowadays, after all. There are all of these projects in urban areas to emphasize and recover an image of Poland that isn't Catholic. People who are directly challenging the Pola Catholic kind of equation. So the Museum of Polish Jews, right? The whole point of the museum is to create, is to try, right? At least that's what some of the organizers want to do, to try to challenge this dominant vision. Are you suggesting then that that's an impossible task? Is it possible perhaps in some settings, not in others? The implication of your talk is, I guess, in a sense pessimistic in that regard, because
it is.
that it's a Sisyphean project. Can't do it.
Thank you very much. So maybe I answered these 2 questions. They actually relate to each other. I will start with yours. So this ethno-national religious identity, because it's like as an all conglomerate actually in the region, is very, very complex. And I'm aware that if I go to a conference and give a talk, there is always someone who tells me, I study Wemkos and they are in fact Ukrainians. I study Rusins and they are in fact... Wemko-Russian identity has been always a politicized subject since the very beginning. So that's why in my book, in my talks, I try to make it clear that since without notwithstanding this big complexity of the local identities, I have decided to refer to the people the way they presented themselves to me. And they said, before the war, we used to call ourselves Russians. It is since the World War II that we rather defined ourselves as Wemkos. So this is the way I try to approach it, but it's very, very complex. And, actually, when I started my fieldwork, I realized that sometimes if you had like three neighbors, a Wemko neighbor was a good friend with a Polish neighbor, but he hated the neighbor that was a Wemko Ukrainian. So there are many, many different conflicts on many different levels. And as to the comparison with other areas, I obviously looked for such materials while writing my book, while doing my research for some comparisons. But I have a feeling that since the emphasis is usually on multiculturalism again, the subject of such studies is usually ethnic diversity. So it's Belarusian Polish borderland or like Polish German borderland. While I couldn't really exclude ethnicity because it's so important. Ethnic identity is so important for understanding religious identities in this area. But I wanted to highlight religious diversity, and I think such works in Poland are not very common. It is ethnic diversity. It is the very idea of one of the notions that made an astonishing career in last years in Poland is the notion of borderland. Everywhere there is borderland. We have Polish Belarusian borderland, new Polish German borderland, due to the fact that many Germans moved to Poland now, and Poles to Germany since Poland joined European Union, Silesian borderland, and so on and so forth. And as to the comparison, as to my pessimism and the comparison with urban areas, I do hope that that Poland can change and can like truly accept diversity and make it like a livable experience, like a livable thing for most of the inhabitants. But I see two obstacles here. First is the fact that many people you talk about, that they are like this urban intelligentsia, urban people who say, oh, we are critical of this Polish Catholic narrative. They still go and marry in church. They still send their kids to religious classes because this is normal, that's what we do. So they are very critical on the level of discourse, but in practice they reproduce this kind of practices. This is what contributes. So that's why this bond between Polish Catholic identity is still so strong. They might not go to church, but the maintenance of rituals and so on. So people keep doing it. But the situation is changing. You have less and less marriages in church. That's for sure. It's gradually changing. And there are many, many initiatives. You can have a multicultural trip of Warsaw, multicultural trips of Krakow. This usually means tracing Jewish traces. And I hope that the museum that you just mentioned will be one of the institutions that will contribute to it. But during my very first visit to the museum, it was like my first 5 minutes. The guide that was standing there said, don't spend too much time looking at these pictures because the museum is huge. It's indeed huge. It's not possible to see everything in one day. And she said, after all, you need to go through 1,000 of our history in connection with Jews. That was the way she phrased the. So I'm curious. This is one guide. I don't want to make any generalization. I think it's very interesting. To what extent? There is no doubt that the museum trained guides, and this is a very important thing for Warsaw, for Poles, for Jews, for the world maybe. But I think that this is something maybe on the level of subconscious, that people speak about our history, our Polish land, this Jewish people being an addition to it.
But I think to go back just to this, jumping in here, that's the paradox that you're pointing out, and that's the tragedy in which Poland is embedded. If you want to build multiculturalism, you need to keep them as others. You have if your goal is to build a multicultural Poland, you have to speak of Jews as Jews in our Poland. If Jews are not Jews, there's no multiculturalism. If Wemko, I'm not Wemko, everyone's Polish. So that's a very difficult situation that Poland is finding itself, that basically it needs those boundaries it needs those bounded categories in order to expand the symbolic boundaries of the nation, of Polishness. So
it needs to essentialize in order to pretend, to deconstruct. Yeah, and that's so I said the first point, what contributes, I said first of all is this kind of maintenance of rituals of the Catholic identity, and the second point I think is precisely, I will mention once again, this narrative of multiculturalism, and especially the fact that, okay, multiculturalism is a notion used in many countries contemporarily, but Polish, and especially Polish historians, they think that the first Polish Republic, Poland in 16th, 17th century, that was also a multicultural nation. This jump back into history, this does not help us to understand history, the hierarchical relations, what it meant to be Polish then, what were ethnic identities. The wrong use of certain categories also doesn't help us to build a kind of more genuine diversity, I think, and accept it. So that would be my answer to that. I'm not totally pessimistic. I thought there's a bit of optimism there. There was there first, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mine, you kind of already answered my question. This won't be a very long one. Your part of your talk reminded me of this one communist saying, everyone is equal, but some are more equal than others.
The Animal Farm, right? Yeah.
And my question was sort of in the same vein, and you basically answered it, but it was, you did a case study of Rostaya, which is a small village, and how much does that picture of religious, hierarchical pluralism map onto bigger cities, and,
Mm-hmm.
if you wanted to you kind of already answered.
Okay, yeah. That's my way to...
So it seems to me that one of the big stories about sort of post-socialist religious revivals has been something called ethnicization, folklorization, culturalization, primordialization of religion to sort of make it, one religion, one ethnos, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I have a couple of questions here, sort of this is like Chris Hahn's work about these problems. So where do you think this particular case that you're investigating here fits into this kind of larger, sort of emerging story about what's happened in the last few decades with religion? And then two, I'm curious about historicizing this a little bit. Like, how do you think that this claim of the kind of essential Catholic Polish thing, how deep is that historically? What sort of transformations has it gone through in the last few decades? That's two very big questions, but I don't know if you want to
Indeed, two very big and but great questions. Can I answer this first and then go back to you? So I think the folklorization of religion that you referred to, that's actually what Matthias Perkmans talks about very often is in his research on the Soviet Union. That's something that was actually typical for the period of socialism. That the only way, after when again the communist regime became more lenient, they thought, okay, we need to allow some kind of presence of religion in public spheres, but in the as folklore only. And I think in theory that's 89, the change of 89 or 91 in the Soviet Union brought some kind of promise that the situation would change. But I think actually it is very often still the case. And I think it is actually the great question: what does the case I'm discussing tell us about religion in this post-socialist religious question? And I think actually what it tells is that the Polish case doesn't really fit. It's very, very different from most of narratives of this post-socialist. There is no religious revival in Poland just because the religious practices in Poland were always very high. People attended church under communists as they attend today. Especially, or declining a bit recently, but not immediately after '89, right? And so I think the Polish case differs in that there was no dramatic change in Poland actually, because the church was so powerful under communists. There were a few difficult years, but generally the church maintained its position. The church in Poland got most of the privileges from the communist authorities in 1999, when the authorities were trying to please the church, hoping that the church would not support the solidarity movement that openly. And I would say that obviously, the situation changed for religious communities because some of them received some sort of funding and support, but their situation is really precarious in the confrontation with the Catholic Church, which it's actually a paradoxical situation because the Polish Constitution grants equal rights to all people of all the religious and ethnic identities, but at the same time, Poland has a concordant agreement with the Vatican, which actually acknowledges the special position of the Church in Poland. There is huge contradiction here. Sometimes when something happens in Poland, when the Church did something again, some people write a letter saying, "Oh, we should try to revoke the concordance with the Vatican." But this happens people talk about it for 1 week and then forget it again. What I didn't manage to talk about in my talk, unfortunately, I have an entire chapter in my book on how religion under socialism was experienced in the village, how people actually claimed that they went to church much more than they go today, how it was a true faith, true religion, and they show very well how even local communist authorities were cooperating with church authorities. Local communist authorities, they would go to the church as anyone else. After all, they were not only authorities, they were also neighbors, friends. They would be godfathers of people's friends. So, but unfortunately, this is like a completely different story. And referring to your question, I think that obviously this is like a very idiosyncratic realm. It's like so different from the rest of Poland. As an anthropologist, this is simply, I think, my approach, that I believe that only by taking under scrutiny, engaging with people's lives, listening to their stories, sharing lives with them, that we can better understand. Like through the scrutiny of the local, we can better understand a broader context. And I think that's what I can say, that I think that although a Wemco farmer no doubt differs from a student from Warsaw and so, or maybe a Polish farmer, because that Wemco farmer difference, their experiences, I think they might have like a lot in common, and like this, my study, I hope, shows this particular configuration of church-state relations in Poland and how it affects different religious others, people who have different ideas, different kind of pluralisms.
Time for one last question, and students. Okay, so short questions, and then students. I know some of you had, but we're having lunch with Dr. Pasieka, so you can ask them then. Phil, and then maybe in the back, if you can just be brief, and she can take both, and then we'll conclude on that.
Just briefly, throughout your whole presentation, I'm getting a sense of what the village is like. My overall impression is there may be prejudices, but I'm not seeing a lot of conflict. Then at the end, you hinted that there are times where that breaks down. I'm wondering if you could just say a little bit more. Are we talking people defacing religious buildings, young people getting into violent conflicts along religious lines? Anything along that?
Okay, yeah, thank you.
And my comment is along his lines also. In your experience, what makes people turn on each other, and what helps them not turn on each other?
Okay, thank you. So I think I can answer these two questions jointly. Thank you very much for them. So this was my main question, my main problem. I was wondering, how is it possible that I was sometimes conversing with the people I met in my head, and I was thinking, how is it possible that yesterday you told me, oh, my wonderful neighbor, we always meet and milk cow together, and how is it possible? This was yesterday. How is it possible that today you told me that stinky Wemco neighbor of mine? From one day to another, and this was the biggest challenge, and unfortunately, I think it's something that many anthropologists struggle to do. When you think about anthropologists studying like areas much more problematic than mine, when you think that anthropologists, for example, who studied the Balkan countries during the war, and they were wondering, the famous study of Tony Bringa, who says people were saying we are all neighbors here, and then the Croatian people killed their Bosnian neighbors again, and they know. So Unfortunately, I do not have an answer to this question. I can only say that it's like a combination of different factors. Some memories, which are memories of past conflicts that are mobilized. Sometimes it is the priest who actually, in a sermon, suggests people that maybe WEMCOs are receiving too many are granted too many rights. You ask some examples. So 5 months after I started my fieldwork, and these 5 months were full of talks about good neighbors, how we love each other, we are like one family. 5 months later, the local government proposed to introduce additional signs in each village. So the signs were the signs with like WEMCO names of the villages. So the original WEMCO names written in Cyrillic. This change would not affect anything. People didn't need to change their identity cards or birth certificates. That would be just an additional sign and the entrance to the village. And there was just like a little war for the week. People would not talk to each other. Polish people, there was a vote in several villages. Polish people would shout during the vote, "We will resettle you again, WEMCOs." You know, the same people who milked the cows together the day before. In one of the villages, after the vote that was successful in the eyes of the Polish majority, Polish people stood up and they sang Polish anthem to, like, you know, the rights to the territory. But like a month later, nobody remembered about it. People would meet again. Like Greek Catholic, Roman Catholic would listen to Radio Maria together. This, like, you know, very right-wing Catholic radio station. And it's, and 1 month later, it could be different again. And that's why I like this concept of hierarchical pluralism, this constant oscillation between being different and what we have in common between hierarchy and pluralism. And I think I wish I knew what is that to push people, or what are pushed towards the pole of pluralism and what towards the pole of hierarchy. And I think I love the case of the vote on double naming, because when you try to understand the reasons of Polish people mobilization against the vote, you see how different were their motivations. We cannot like actually establish one cause. So you had like educated people like from Warsaw and Krakow who actually settled in that area that would vote. Some of them voted in favor, some against. There were some farmers who like know nothing about the region's history, and they just said, "Oh, I vote in favor of the name. I'm respecting my neighbor." But some of these farmers, they were just, you know, kind of, you know, encouraged by the Catholic priest, for example, to vote against. They thought, "Oh no, what are they doing? They're changing. We don't believe the government. Probably we will have to pay for the change of identity cards. It's better not to believe it's only about money." So you had like some local activists who would say, an additional name would attract more tourists. Let's put an additional sign. It will be like exotic, interesting. And other local activists were saying, "Oh no, after all, okay, these minorities, we allow a concert, but two plates, that's too much." Very, very different people with completely different motivations brought to this.
How close was the vote?
Oh, so there were. The vote took place in 9 villages, and actually, I think, if I remember correctly, in 5 of the villages are very, very small localities inhabited mostly by WEMCO people. So there, the decision was actually in favor of the name. In one of the villages, so these are 5. In one of the villages, a Polish man who recently moved to the area, he went to each and every Polish house, and he asked people to stay at home, not to vote against. And thanks to that, also they managed to introduce the name, only because the Polish part of the village did not go to vote, because he knew that if they went to vote, they would vote against. So this is in one of the 6, number 7, very small village inhabited mostly by basically exclusively, because this is one of the villages that very few WEMCOs returned, and today it's mostly like freelancer workers from Warsaw and Krakow against the name. but they are the one who then organize workshop of tolerance for the local people. So they didn't manage to introduce the name there. One village, the most actually diverse village in the area, and there 1/3 of people were in favor, 2/3 against. And the last village in which, after big fights, like really war, actually the Wemco name was introduced thanks to the votes of the people who recently bought a house there, and they went to the local office to get temporary residence there. They voted that thanks to that, but I think it was only 1 or 2 votes. The difference was really small, but so they put the plate. One of them was destroyed quickly afterwards. So it keeps changing, and interestingly, because there are several rural districts of this kind where there is a Polish Wemco population, and many others they decided not to even propose the initiative because some said, and maybe people are not yet ready for that. That also could be true. But what is interesting is that I think I don't have an exact number, but I think in Poland there are 350 villages with German names, 30 with Lithuanians, and none with Ukrainians, and now altogether 10 with Wemco names. Maybe it keeps changing, but it changes but slowly. Yeah.
On that cheery note.
Thank you.